fire. You are with me and you won't let go. I've tried to hate myself, thinking that's how things will change, but it never helps. Piling up the blame, fighting fire with fire, hurt with more hurt. Breaking my own heart makes everything worse. I gotta be kind to myself, 'cause I can't change anyway else. It's the kindness of my Savior, it's how it changes me. And I can be kind to myself. I know it sounds insane, but the old way wasn't working. I try to medicate when the pain's under the surface. I've never healed by power and through. I had to learn how to see me the way that you do. I gotta be kind to myself, 'cause I can't change anyway else. It's the kindness of my Savior, it's how it changes me. And I can be kind to myself. Hey, don't misunderstand, it's not permission, it's conviction over condemnation. One curious love of God, it's such a better, sweeter song. It has a way of showing me what's really going on. What does the voice in your head sound like when you fail for the 1000th time? Is it cruel or is it kind? Oh, I gotta be kind to myself, 'cause I can't change anyway else. It's the kindness of my Savior, it's how He changes me. I can be kind to myself. I can be kind to myself. I can be kind to myself. I see the tears on your face, I watch your friends walk away. Oh, I've been there too, I've been there too. I see the nights you can't sleep, I hear your broken heartbeat. Oh, I felt that too, yeah, I felt that too. For you, my body was broken, so you are never forsaken. Start walking with your head held high. The future is bright. Heaven's gates are open wide. Every trouble that you ever walked through, peace, my child, I am fighting for you. I am fighting for forsaken. Start walking with your head held high. The future is bright. Heaven's gates are open wide. Every trouble that you ever walked through, peace, my child, I am fighting for you. I am fighting for you. I'll never stop. I'll never stop. I'll never stop. Death couldn't keep me away. I'll never stop. I'll never stop. I'll never stop calling your name. Yeah, I'll never stop. It's true. Start walking with your head held high. The future is bright. Heaven's gates are open wide. Every trouble that you ever walked through, peace, my child, I am fighting for you. I am fighting for you. I am fighting for you. When the past it comes to haunt me, it tells me what I've done. It reminds me what's gone wrong. When my sins are laid before me, my Lord, you take them on. Yes, my Lord, you take them on. So if I fall and if I fail, I will trust your mercy. It's greater than all of this. And if I bend and if I break, I'll trust the hands that hold me are greater than all my regrets. You are greater than all my regrets. You are greater than all my regrets. You are, you are. Father, I know I break your heart when I choose my way, when I doubt your love. But you take me as I am, a child. Yeah, you whisper in my ear, let's get up and try again. So if I fall and if I fail, I will trust your mercy is greater than all of this. And if I bend and if I break, I'll trust the hands that hold me are greater than all my regrets. You are greater than all my regrets. You are.
Hey, Jake. if you could pull up one of her videos so we can check it for sound, make sure I got you guys plugged for sound.
Test. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test, test. Perfect.
Hey, Jake, maybe pull that up for full screen. We'll see if that helps.
Mic test. Mic test. Mic test. Okay.
If you push talk B, it stays on. So talk A.
speakers are in the very front.
Through historical science, we consider things that happened in the past, but they cannot be checked in the same way.
I can't tell if it's
We don't have
playing through
access
or
to
not.
the past like we do the present because, well, it's gone, right? All we really have is speculation, or at best, circumstantial
playing?
evidences of past events based on what we
No, I mean
see
out
in the
there.
present. That's not to say that we can't make intelligent guesses about
we're
the
getting
past
something.
or form reasonable inferences from rocks or fossils in the present, but we certainly cannot directly test our conclusions because we cannot repeat the past. Got it? So, does that mean historical science is unimportant? Not at all. Let's drop an example down here for a minute and take a look at the Eiffel Tower. You know, that 19th century Parisian monument designed by Gustave Eiffel that stands 1,063 feet tall, which was built as the entrance for the 1889 World's Fair, and is still the tallest building in Paris today,
Just
visited by
barely
millions of
pulling.
people each year? Yeah, that one. Well, guess what? Everything I just told you is true. But how do we test it? Well, applying observational science, we can, of course, observe the Eiffel Tower anytime we're in Paris. It's here in the present. Then we can continue by testing the height and
That's all I
comparing
can
it
do.
to all the other structures in Paris and confirm the claim that it is in
Introducing our cutting-edge Smart Zoom reading glasses, co-developed by NASA engineers. No
Here I am, all my intentions, all my obsessions, I wanna lay them all down in your hands. Only your love is vital, though I'm not entitled. Still you call me your child. God, you don't need me, but somehow you want me. Oh, how you love me. Somehow that frees me to take my hands
Testing, testing. Oh, there we go. Testing, testing. All right. Finally got this figured out. All right. Sorry for the delay, but we had some real technical issues going on. You gotta love technology. So, well, at least for next month, we'll know what not to do. So, all right, with that, we'll jump on in and get started. So, my name is Ellie Husband. I'm from the Alpha Omega Institute, and today I'm going to tell you about how the book of Genesis, as well as the entire Bible, of course, is truly a book of history. Now, the first few chapters of the book of Genesis tend to be the most maligned, I guess you would say, in terms of like, oh, this didn't really happen. And that's supposed to say Genesis 1 through 11. So, 1 through 11, a history. So, introduction. The book of Genesis, is it stories or is it history? So, I'm sure all of you guys, or most of you, have know that the Word of God was the inspired Word of God, that it was written by inspiration by many authors over nearly 2,000 years, 66 books, all put together into one library that we call the Bible, which literally means the book. And we consider this, within Christianity, to be the inerrant Word of God. Inerrant meaning, in its original text, it was without flaw. Now, there's a little bit of a question, though. What about the story of, say, Noah's Ark and all the animals on it? I mean, not always, but a lot of times when we were taught that story in Sunday school, it was very much kind of a kiddified version that didn't seem like it had any real meat or substance to it other than for a good moral lesson. Or how about the story of creation? Again, fun story to tell the kids, but does it actually explain the very beginning of time and how everything came to be? Well, let's talk about history for a second. History is our ideas, so to speak, based on past records and evidence that we find in the present day about what we think happened in the past. Technically, all of our historical knowledge is one big guess, so keep that in mind. Now, what about science, though? Isn't science we can use to kind of test out that history and verify it? And, oh, wait a minute, when you put science and history together, don't we get charts like this of geologic time or this nice timeline of, cave Stone Age man, progressing through the ages and civilization, going from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists to building great big civilizations? Well, here's something interesting to note. We say one of these is story and one of these is history. But if you look at history, and should we notice how it's H-I story. It's high story. Wait a minute. There's a story in history? Well, let's take a look at observational science for a second. This is the science that we usually think of. So this is the science that you can test in a laboratory, measure things out in the world. So what about this shape? What do you observe about the shape? Well, it's got two curves that don't meet together. It's black on a white background. Not much else we can determine just by looking at it. Now, if we were to start asking, well, what was this shape originally meant to be? Is there anything missing? We go into what's actually considered historical or forensic science. Technically, we're taking observational science and trying to figure out what happened in the past. For example, was this shape always this way, or did it used to be a different way? Well, what do you think was missing? What do you think the shape was supposed to be? You'd think, right? It could be any of these options, though. There's no guarantee that it was originally a circle. The only way we would know is if it was originally a circle is if somebody who saw the shape in its original form actually told us. That is the trickiness of both history, like a history book, and historical science, trying to use science to figure out history. So, this is the data or facts versus an interpretation. The interpretation is us trying to figure out what it used to be. So, back to the story, history. Notice that there's the word story in history. When I went on the Merriam-Webster dictionary, guess what I saw as the very first definition of history? Tale, story. The second definition is a chronological record of significant events, often including an explanation of their causes. The first definition is actually a story. So guess what? History is just the story that we think is true. So, story, history, well, really, we're talking about two different theories about the past being represented here. The one that people are usually taught is the evolutionary theory of the history of the past. That things came to be over a slow, gradual process over millions and millions of years. No God was involved, or if he was, he used the process of evolution to create things. Now, biblical creation, on the other hand, says, no, let's take the Bible at its literal word. No gerrymandering the text here, let's just take it as it is. God created in 6 literal days by the word of his power. Done. End of story. So, what I'm going to be presenting to you guys today then, so as I said, the facts are the same, the interpretations are not. You could have two different scientists or historians looking at the exact same thing, but coming to two very different ideas about how it came to be and why it is the way it is. So, back to that second definition of history, a chronological record of significant events. And it also is a treatise presenting systemically related natural phenomena. In other words, somebody is giving a description of how things came to be within the natural world. In fact, there's a reason why a lot of our science museums are called natural history museums, because that's exactly what they're doing. Now, some of them I've noticed have been changing their names lately because people don't really know what natural history means anymore, but that is what it means. History is also a branch of knowledge that records and explains past events. So, what I'm going to be doing for you guys this evening is to be combining history and science together and give you a natural history of Genesis. That's basically what I'm going to be doing tonight. So, this is going to be, I guarantee, pretty different. Now, some of it you may have heard before, but I guarantee you there's going to be some parts that you have probably never heard before. Some of this I actually only learned within the past year. So, actually with Alpha Omega Institute. So, speaking of the various creation ministries out there, all the information I'm about to give you tonight, I've learned over the years from organizations like Answers in Genesis when I was a kid, Alpha Omega Institute, who I'm interning with now, Creation Ministries International, which also has a lot of material. They're sort of like the international version of Answers in Genesis. Genesis Apologetics, they're based in California. They make stuff more focused on college level. And then finally, the grandfather of them all, ICR, Institute for Creation Research, the very first creation ministry that was ever founded, and technically, out of all of these guys, is the one that's most focused on doing the actual scientific work. Everybody else does research as well, but they're mostly educational institutions. So, with that, let's get started. So, creation. This would be the first, let's see, from chapters 1 through 2-ish of Genesis. We're going to be staying in Genesis chapter 1 for the most part in this section. Okay. In the beginning. I always want to start at the beginning when it comes to a story. Now, usually, it's once upon a time in a land far away. Well, in this case, we start with, in the beginning. Well, we're actually going to jump ahead and take a look at John first. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In other words, everything owes its existence to God. By faith we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. This is all from the New Testament, by the way. He, Jesus Christ, is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Now, let's do a quick overview of the days of creation. Some of you, it may have been a long time since we covered this subject. So, day one, God created earth. He created light, right? He said, let there be light, and there was light, and he separated the light from the darkness. And then day two, he created the atmosphere, separated the waters from the waters. Day three, he created the dry land and then the plants on that dry land. Day four, he created the sun, moon, and stars. Day five, he created the sea and flying creatures. And day six, he created land animals and man. Now, we're going to be using this diagram for the rest of the talk to help keep track of where we are within the creation week. So, this is going to be the part I guarantee that probably none of you have heard about. So, you may have heard of this verse before, though. From the beginning, creation in its magnificence enlightens us to his nature. Creation itself makes his undying power and divine identity clear, even though they are invisible. Now, a lot of times we focus on the power part, like, creation, the stars, the massiveness of the universe and galaxies, and the intricacy of all the animals and stuff that we see. Yeah, that demonstrates his power, the fact he just spoke that into existence. But how many of you have caught the divine identity part? Wait a minute. What could the natural physical world tell us about a spiritual God? Well, let's talk about some of God's attributes reflected in creation. So, take this footprint or fingerprint, for example. Is that footprint on the beach the totality of the person who made it? No. But does it give you evidence that the person was there? Yeah, it does. And can it tell you some basic things about that person? How big they were, whether they were a child, an adult, sometimes even whether they were male or female, their foot size, all that? Their weight? Yep, you can tell all that. But can you tell hair color, eye color, skin color, personality, and all that? No. Or what about a thumbprint? Can you identify someone by their thumbprint? Yeah. But how much can you tell about a person from their thumbprint alone? Not much. You have to know who that thumbprint belongs to. Well, what I'm going to show you guys is that there are actually metaphorical footprints or fingerprints of God within nature that are startlingly, well, you'll just see what I mean. So, let's talk first about math. Everybody loves math. Well, math is the foundation of the sciences, so it's a good place to start. Everything that's done in science, every natural phenomena in the natural world can be explained mathematically. In fact, scientists have been able to predict natural phenomena that they found decades later because some mathematician was just messing around and discovered some concept that then decades later scientists went, wait a minute, this is in nature. Well, 1 + 1 = 2. Everybody knows that, even a toddler. 1, that's 2. Well, 1 + 1 = 2. That's true here in this room. That's true in Denver. That's true in California. That's true in Africa. That's true on the Earth. That's true on the moon. That's true on our sun, solar system. You could go to the ends of the universe, and 1 + 1 will still equal 2. So, this mathematical fact is true no matter where you are. It is universal. You cannot hold or see this fact in the physical world. You can't stub your toe on a 1. It will never change. 1 + 1 is always 2. And, as a bonus, math has infinities. In fact, there's a whole class of mathematics just dealing with the infinities of math, every one bigger than the next. Yeah, no, it's crazy. You can have infinities that are smaller than other infinities and bigger than other infinities. You can multiply and divide by infinities. It's nuts. Anyway, that's actually what this guy is. This is a representation of the smallest cardinal set of a infinite set of numbers. Interestingly enough, they ran out of English letters and they ran out of Greek letters, so they started using Hebrew letters. I thought this was kind of appropriate. The aleph, the Hebrew equivalent of an A. Now, who else is universal and omnipresent, technically? Who else is immaterial? Who else is eternal? And who else is infinite? I'd say that's a pretty strong footprint, don't you agree? Math, it is. God, I am. Math is self-existent. Theoretically, if the whole universe were to be gone tomorrow, math would still be. In fact, some creation scientists think that the way they kind of think about it is that math is a reflection of how God thinks. That's why it has all of his attributes. It gets better. So, how about the Trinity, talking about divine attributes? Well, all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with how God is the Son, is the Spirit, is the Father, but the Son is not the Father is not the Spirit, and the Spirit is not the Son, right? Somehow he's three distinct entities, that they're not each other, and yet they're all God. Well, let's look at a faint reflection of this. So, days 1, day 2, and day 3. Did you know that the days of creation actually have a very intentional order to them? This actually came out of a paper that I read recently where they pulled this out, and I was like, whoa, that's incredible. So, day 1 is the separation of light and dark. Day 2 is the separation of waters above and waters below, or sky, sea. Day 3 is the separation of the land and the waters. Now, guess what? Day 4 is, well, let's put some light givers up in that to make a distinction between light and darkness. Day 5, let's put animals to go in the sky and put animals to go into the water. And then day 6, let's put animals on land. Each day, day 1, day 2, day 3 is setting up for its parallel day. Day 1 for day 4, day 2 for day 5, and day 3 for day 6. Did you catch that before? I didn't, and I've been studying this for years. Now, this is more a little bit like a thumbprint in terms of the example. Get ready for the footprint. So, a true reflection of the Trinity in nature is something that is made up of multiple distinct things that are made of or are parts of the same thingness. Do we actually have anything like that in the natural world? Truly like that? Not just an analogy like a free-leaf clover? Let's talk about the universe for a second. The universe is made out of, in its most basic components, space, time, matter. The universe could not exist without any of these components, but space is not the universe, time is not the universe, but matter is not the universe. But the universe is space, the universe is time, and the universe is matter. Ta-da! Trinitarian universe. So, now let's get to the day 1. So, Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's stop right there. There's so much to unpack just in this one word. In the beginning. Well, I don't know. What's something that has a beginning? Heavens and earth. Another way to translate that phrase would be, God made the universe. In the beginning, time, the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. Ta-da! First verse, the table is laid. The foundations are set in place. The mathematical principles are now functioning. It's ready to populate. Because technically, if the Earth, everything were to just blow apart into all of its, matter, particles, all that, it'd still have a universe. There'd just be nothing in it except for microscopic particles just zipping around. So, in the beginning, time. Time is the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future regarded as a whole. It's also a continuous, measurable quantity in which events occur in a sequence proceeding from the past through the present to the future. Uh-oh. I just caught another trinity. Time is a trinity. The past, present, and future are part of time, but past is not all of time, present's not all of time, and future's not all of time. But if you didn't have a future, it's not time. If you didn't have a present, it's not time. If you didn't have a past, it's not time. Ta-da! Another trinity. Time is something that you can measure, but it's also something we exist in. It's very weird that way. We can measure time, but we're stuck by time, and it gets really, really weird. I'm not going to get into all the weirdness of just time. Now, God, though, is outside of time, because remember, he made it. So, like Peter says, do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. To him, he's, in a way, seeing everything that's happening all at once, all the things that could ever happen. Yeah, my little pea brain can't even hardly get outside the time box. So now, let's talk briefly about space. So space is not just outer space, it's the unlimited or incalculably great, technically because I haven't found the edges of the universe yet, and there's actually a lot of debate as to whether there is an edge of a universe to find or not. Three-dimensional, another trinity, realm or expanse in which all material objects are located and all events occur. And now matter. Now, states of matter, water as a liquid is, water. Same when water is an ice and when water is a gas, it's all water. Another trinity. It keeps going. The paper that I got these concepts from, they had over 50 examples of trinities in nature. 50 of them. And those are just the ones that they put in the paper. They said they had found many, many more. Yeah. Now, matter is made up of atoms arranged into different elements. That's what chemistry is all about. It's just the interactions of matter and energy, technically. Now, if you put space, time, and matter together, you get, the universe. Now, some of you may or may not have heard of, Einstein's general or special relativity. I won't be getting into that tonight, but basically the idea is that all the matter within the universe is interacting with this space-time fabric, and that's what causes gravity. Yeah, ordinary gravity is actually an interaction of space and time. It gets weird fast. This is a little illustration of a two-dimensional slice of this theoretical space-time fabric. Now, what's neat about this is this has actually been verified. As crazy as it seems, they have been able, with observational science, to verify that this space-time fabric is a real thing. Now, here's what's interesting. A lot of times when you see an illustration of this space-time fabric, it's flat. You're just getting a two-dimensional plane. Well, I found a fun little graphic that would show, if you could see, so to speak, space-time fabric, what it would actually look like in three dimensions. Look at that little ball whizzing around, pulling those threads together as it passes by. That's gravity. Gravity's actually that. So right now, as I'm standing here on this stage, I'm actually warping space-time towards me. And so are you. We're just so itty-bitty witty winky that we don't really do anything. And by the way, in case you were wondering, matter and energy are actually the same thing. So energy's covered within this too. Now, matter and energy plus space and time equals physics. So what did we really have on day one? A lot more than just light, I'll tell you that much. But let's not discount light for a second, okay? So physics is the foundation of science, yes. Now, Genesis 1, 2, 6 through 8. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Now, there's some very interesting possible interpretations of this verse, but we don't have time to get into those today. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, one day. Notice, there's a specific span of time here. Evening, morning, one day. Anybody that tries to tell you that the days of Genesis are just metaphorical eons of time, the text does not read like that. You have to manipulate the text in order to come up with that interpretation. On its face, what is an evening and what is a morning and what's in between them? Well, we would consider that a day, just a 24-hour day. Now, what is light anyway? Well, in physics, light is electromagnetic radiation. So what we see as light is actually a very thin band of the entirety of electromagnetic radiation. In fact, like this clicker I'm using, it has like a little radio receiver transmitter in it. If you could see all the radio waves in the air, because radio waves are actually a form of light, believe it or not, because they're electromagnetic radiation, you would be blinded by the amount of radio waves, coming from man-made objects, but also coming from outer space, too. So it's kind of a good thing we can only see a very narrow band of it. Now, here's what's crazy, though. Again, I don't have time to go into this, but according to Einstein's theories of relativity, light warps, I'm way oversimplifying here, light warps space-time so that it is the only true constant in the universe. Yep, according to physics, everything else is relative, light's the only constant. Now, I wonder who else is compared to light that's also a constant that never changes? I don't know. Think over that one. Now, day 2. We're finally to day 2. So, then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let's separate the waters from the waters." God made the expanse, and separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. Now, in this translation, it's a lowercase heaven because it's not the heavens, it's heaven. Now, some translations will just say firmament, other translations will say sky. There's debate among creation scientists as to what exactly is going on here, whether it was just a separation, whether it was just a making of the sky and the sea, or whether it was something a little more than that. I'll just give you one quick theory. Some creation astronomers, cosmologists who are, trying to figure out the structure of the universe, believe that the reason we have something called cosmic background radiation, which is like a constant, heat that we can measure wherever we point instruments in the sky, is because those outer waters are really a water shell, per se, surrounding the universe. And what God is calling heaven or the expanse is, well, the heavens, space. Now, of course, it depends on whether you interpret that as space heaven or sky heaven? So you can see how there's some real debate over that topic. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. So we got our sky, we got our water. Now, what is water anyway? Water is actually quite special. It has properties that few other elements or molecules even have. Water, actually, with its states of matter, is very strange because cold water is heavier than warm water, but then ice, which is colder than cold water, floats. That's just one of the ways in which water is actually really weird. Another thing is that water is a universal solvent, meaning you can dissolve anything, theoretically, anything in water. Yeah, you know how there's this whole like universal acid, that would be so horrible. Well, water is a universal solvent. Give it enough time and it will eat through anything. Now, water covers 70% of Earth's surface, so it's what regulates our climate, temperature, and all the sea life that live in there. There's a lot more of that than there is animals on the land. In fact, only 10% of our oceans have been explored. Our oceans are less explored than outer space is. Yeah. So, but water shows up in other places besides Earth too. There are water ice caps on Mars. There's comets with their water ice that create the tails. There's actually a moon that circles around Jupiter that they're pretty certain actually has, that's completely covered in an icy water ocean. And turns out a whole lot of supposedly empty space actually has water in it, just in a gaseous form. Yeah, those nebula over there, they're chock full of water. Water is actually everywhere in the universe, in places you wouldn't have necessarily guessed. So, now we're on to day 3. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And then it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Now, speaking of that dry land, there's actually a very interesting theory among creation geologists that there's a form of metamorphic rock called schist. This particular one is Vishnu schist. That's what we have at the base of the Colorado National Monument and what makes up the Black Canyon of the Gunnison. Now, what's crazy is that this metamorphic rock is actually on the very bottom of all the other rock layers we have on the Earth. It's just in some sections all the other layers have been planed off and the bottom foundational layers are what's left. There are many creation geologists who believe that when you look at these basement rocks, you're actually looking at original creation week rocks. So, next time you go to Black Canyon of the Gunnison, you're actually looking at creation week rock in one of the few places you can actually see it so exposed. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." So on, so on. The land produced vegetation, all according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Now, jumping ahead in the chapter, God actually said to Adam that I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds in the sky, and to all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. So originally, before man's sin, everyone was vegetarian. Sorry, plants have no rights. So, everything from grassy meadows to great forests to, don't forget, all those underwater plants and flowers and every other type of plant in existence. In fact, did you know that the algae in our world's oceans actually makes up the majority of the oxygen production on Earth? Yeah, in comparison, the trees are not actually doing very much. But I mean, oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface, so kind of makes sense in terms of scale. All right, now remember how the first 3 days were setting up for the next 3 days? Well, day 1 was setting up for day 4. Then God said, let there be lights. So now we've got light bearers instead of light just being its own thing. Yeah, that's another thing. Light doesn't have to have a light emitter to exist. Light can just be its own thing. So that's why God could say, let there be light, before there was anything to emit light. Now, there's some debate as to where that light may have been coming from and how in the world do we have a day-night cycle, if there was like no sun or whatnot, but only God knows, really. So, lights to separate the day from the night. They shall serve as signs and for seasons, for days and for years, to give light on the earth. Now, let's pay attention to the signs and seasons, days and years. God made 2 great lights, the greater light, the sun, to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night, the moon. And, by the way, he made the stars also, all innumerable number of them. Just an aside. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, and to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a 4th day. So, what was made on day 4? Well, the earth, the moon, and the sun. Our entire solar system, all the planets, galaxies, nebula, any possible exoplanets out there, other star systems, everything was made. Everything that was out in outer space, comets and asteroids and the like, were all made on day 4. I just find it almost kind of funny that he made the stars also is almost like a, oh, by the way. And yet it's like we are trying to just even grasp the number, and it's like, nope. If you were to count every grain of sand on every beach in the world, that is the estimated possible number of all the stars in the universe. It's a massive number that I can't quite recall at the moment, but it's just like, we're talking mind-bogglingly huge. Now, the sun actually has a core, like the earth as well, just kind of its own thing there. And we have the moon. We have our earth with its core. Now, sun, moon, and earth, clock of the skies. Remember how God said that they were going to be for signs and for seasons and for years? Well, then God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and they shall serve as signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Well, what makes up a day? Well, the earth spins around on its axis. The side that's in the sun is in daytime. The side that's away from the sun is in nighttime. It switches sides about every 24 hours, and that's a day. Now, days used to be measured by sundials. So people would look at where the sun's shadow was on the sundial and go, oh, okay, it's, 5 a.m., this one's saying about 6 a.m. in the morning. Now, the month is actually determined by the moon. Now, our calendar is a little weird and it actually doesn't quite follow the moon. There's other cultures that use what are called lunar calendars where they actually do follow the monthly cycle of the moon. And that's why, for example, our calendar and Israel's calendar don't really line up, is because God's people, the Jewish people, they use a lunar calendar to determine their months for their holidays. But then they also use what's called a civic calendar that's based on our calendar, which uses the sun. I don't exactly remember how they determine the months in our calendar and why it's a little bit different, but it is. So, from a new moon to another new moon is a month. And it varies a little bit as to how many days that is, but that's a month. And it goes through those phases about 12 times a year. And what is a year, by the way? Well, a year is how long it takes for the earth to go around the sun once. So at this point, we got ourselves a pretty tight clock here. The Earth's spinning on its axis for a day, and the Moon's spinning on its axis around the Earth for a month, and the Earth and the Moon are spinning around the Sun to make a year. But wait, what about the week? Turns out there is no astronomical measurement for the week. Yet, strangely enough, it occurs in cultures throughout the world and throughout history. There is actually no explanation that secular anthropologists, people who study people, have been able to come up with for why this week is a thing. It just is for some bizarre reason, even though there's no astronomical reason for it. Even though there was no way for somebody to calculate a week out by the stars in the sky or something like that. This right here is one of the biggest proofs for the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of rest. A very faint cultural memory. So we got our solar system here with our planets that were also made on day 4. Now the interesting thing is that the word planet actually comes from the Greek word for wandering star. So when it says God made the stars also, technically within the Hebrew, they were also referring to our planets. So you can actually see how in the night sky to the unaided eye, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, they look just like really big stars that move around. It wasn't until we got telescopes that we were able to find out that they were not just stars. Now check out these amazing, I'm pretty certain these are Hubble images of these amazing nebula. They're just so pretty. And then this is a James Webb telescope image. You can tell because the stars have the points on them that it's a Webb telescope image. So pretty, isn't it? Now, God, of course, had to be creative and come up with all sorts of different types of stars. Oh no, he wasn't just going to go all generic star. No, we got red giant stars, red supergiant stars, yellow dwarf stars, red dwarf stars, brown dwarf stars, which are actually more purple. Why they call them brown, I don't know. Blue giant stars and white dwarf stars. And that's not even talking about neutron stars or black holes or pulsars or all the other weird and wild stuff out there. Now, this is called the Eagle Head Nebula, but if you were to crop the picture closer, those three upright parts are called the Pillars of Creation. I thought that was pretty interesting. This is also another Webb image. There's this guy. Now, nebula are actually giant clouds of space dust, thousands of light years across. Like, we're looking at them from so many light years away that, it's like, oh yeah, all that stuff's pretty close together. But no, actually, it's not. It's just to us, it all looks nice and close. I think I showed oh yeah, and galaxies. No, not just one type of galaxy. No, we gotta have barred, spiral, and irregular, and spiral, and particular, and ecliptical, and linear. Ours is a spiral galaxy, by the way. At least as best as scientists have been able to determine, the galaxy that we reside in, the Milky Way, is a spiral. Now, remember what I said about how many stars there are in the universe? Well, think of how many stars are just in a galaxy. Well, astronomers think that there are as many galaxies in our universe as there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And by the way, for context, this image is what's called the Hubble Deep Field image. This is a picture taken over the course of multiple, I think it was several months of pointing the telescope at one point in the sky. That section of sky would be a grain of sand held out at arm's length. Turns out astronomers are finding out that everything that looks like a star in our night sky, that's past a certain point in terms of our telescope, when they were looking, so if we go back a couple, it's most likely that a lot of those stars that we see past those nebula are actually galaxies with billions of stars in each galaxy. It's incalculably incomprehensible how big the universe actually is. And it just gets a little aside. Oh, yeah, he made the stars also. Wild. So, let's talk about constellations for a second. You think they were something invented by the Greeks? Oh no, let's take a look at the second oldest book in the Bible besides Job. Job 9:9 and 38:32. Who makes the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades? The Pleiades are actually a star cluster. And the constellations of the south. Can you bring a constellation in its season and guide the Bear with her satellites? The Bear in this case is Ursa Major. Turns out the pyramids of Gaza in Egypt are aligned with the star on Orion's belt. Yeah. Turns out the ancient people were actually more avid astronomers than we were. I don't have time to go into that detail today, but astronomy has actually been very important to humankind throughout history. And why that is, and why we had constellations all the way back in the time of Job, I could give a whole lecture on just that topic alone. So, day 5. Now we're on to the sky creatures and sea creatures. So remember, day 2 was setting up for day 5. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life, skies be filled with birds of every kind." God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms on the water, and every sort of bird. Now, depending on the translation, sometimes it'll say bird, other times it'll say fowl. In the actual Hebrew, it doesn't just mean bird. It means every flying thing. So that would include like bats and insects and butterflies and the like. Or flying reptiles. Each producing offspring of the same kind. Let the fish fill the seas, let the birds multiply on the earth. And evening passed and morning came, marking the 5th day. So, let's take a look at some of these critters of the ocean. There's some very interesting sea life out there. Like that starfish or that worm-like guy. Or that little shrimp or that, I think that's a type of like tube worm with a Christmas tree worm, that's what it is. Cuttlefish or octopus. Or check out this guy. That's quite showy. This is a sea slug. Yeah, sea slugs are a little more bedazzled than our regular variety garden slug. Or how about vertebrates, like a fish? Lots of fish. So many fish. In fact, fish are actually the most diverse group of vertebrates on the planet. Yep. More than birds. More than mammals. More than reptiles. Fish beat them all in terms of the sheer number of species. There may be a good reason for that, though, and it has to do with something called Noah's flood, and only 2 or maybe 7 of every kind of land animal got on the ark. But the fish in the oceans, well, they were kind of left to their own devices, so it's very possible way more fish survived the flood than land animals. And something about genetic bottlenecks may have had an effect. So we also have whales and dolphins, those mammals, or seals, or penguins, or crocodiles. The way the Bible classifies creatures is by where they live. So what we would call a bird or a reptile or a mammal, it's like if it lived in water, it was created on day 5. That's basically the criteria. Now, if we look at the fossil record, we find that there are many types of sea creatures that have gone extinct that some look kind of familiar and others look just so bizarre or unimaginable. Like that plesiosaur over on the right. Or look at that Kronosaurus just about to take a bite out of that tractor tire size ammonite. Or how about that big old fish with a bony helmet for a face? Or that fish that's kind of imitating a hammer shark but like with an anvil. I don't know. Or those guys over there. Whole ecosystem that we don't have anymore with sea scorpions and all sorts of weird, crazy life like those trilobites on the bottom. Now, flying invertebrates. These would cover all the, what we call like flying insects. Gnats, butterflies, flies, bees, birds, bats. These were all the creatures of the sky that would have been made on this day. Now, bats actually are quite diverse, from little micro bats to big old flying fox fruit bats. Flying insects come in all shapes and sizes, from the beetles with their origami wings that they can fold underneath their hard shell covers to the butterflies with their amazing aerodynamics. Look at all the variety in insect wings. So much creativity. And then birds. Oh, birds. If fish are the most diverse vertebrate in total, birds are the most successful vertebrate on land. So many varieties of birds. All kinds. All the birds. Whether it's grassland or plains or forest. But now, let's get to some of those guys we found that are now since extinct. You've probably seen fellows like that guy on the right, the flying reptiles. But did you know that they've discovered lizards that look like they were paragliding with their back legs? It's crazy. And then, of course, let's not forget Pteranodon, or the Quetzalcoatlus. Okay, the Quetzalcoatlus is the largest flying animal known. He's related to that guy, but just way, way bigger. On the ground, he was the height of a giraffe. His wingspan was that of a small fighter jet. In fact, he's that guy second over to the right. Obviously, it is not to scale. Yeah, imagine having a small fighter jet-sized reptile fly over your head. And there were some pretty weird birds that we found too, with long tails and wing claws and, oh yeah, that bird. They've actually found a bird with membrane wings, crazy enough. Or flightless birds that would like to have you for a snack. How about Archaeopteryx or Microraptor? We don't have guys like these anymore. Or this guy. Actually, I think he's quite the pretty little guy. Very unique. Certainly don't have birds like that anymore. For whatever reason, it appears this particular type of bird went extinct. I mean, we could have had like these Archaeopteryx fighting over a lizard on our beaches. Day 6. So, day 3 was the foundation for day 6. Now, I'm not going to read this entire thing. I'll just point out the really important parts. God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creeping things, beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And so he made everything according to their kind. He saw it was good. Now, what do we mean by livestock, creeping things, beasts of the earth? Well, again, it depends on the translation as to how these words are put, but livestock is interpreted to mean animals useful to humans. So this would be, well, what we would call livestock, like horses and cows and other types of animals that seem more like they were made for people, especially horses. Horses, the way that they're structured is so like, how could evolution explain an animal that seems so well built to carry something on its back? Something that is totally unnatural for an animal to do. Now, creeping things is usually interpreted to mean stuff like lizards, the non-flying insects, worms, the like, that creep along the ground. And then beasts of the earth, sometimes called, wild beasts of the earth, those would be like everything else. The deer, all those animals that may have not necessarily been intended for human use, although it's a little hard to tell. Because after all, where you live in the fallen world, where animals naturally have a fear of people, so it can be a little hard to determine which animals were kind of intended for. But you notice, the animals that are tended to be kept as pets are mammals. Then come birds. And then reptiles are the exotic ones you can't really tame. You can just make comfortable. And insects. You can't really tame an insect either. So that seems to be sort of a rough dividing line between the livestock beasts of the earth. So invertebrates, we got everything from walking stick bugs to crayfish to woolly worms to spiders. We got amphibians, I forgot to mention those, like frogs and that extinct salamander kind of guy. Salamanders, and that guy's kind of like a legless lizard, except amphibian version. Very weird fellow. And let's not forget reptiles. I mean, even today we have such a variety, like turtles and tortoises and crocodiles. And oh, by the way, the turtle would actually be like on day 5 technically, but snakes and lizards. And then mammals. We're pretty familiar with mammals. Mammals are sort of like the closest to us, so to speak, in terms of like the way they're built and the way they act. Now, notice something I've been saying over and over again. Kind, 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 kind. Why do I keep saying kind? Well, creation scientists don't obviously subscribe to this tree of life theory that everything has a common ancestry down to one, single-celled organism way back in the past. Instead, what we believe is instead of one tree of life, we actually have a creation orchard. So every kind of animal is like a distinct group that they could diversify within that group and breed among each other in that group, but they could not breed with or turn into another kind of group. So dogs will always be dogs, monkeys will always be monkeys, sparrows will always be sparrows, triceratops will always be triceratops, well, ceratopsians technically. But where exactly that dividing line is, we're still trying to figure out. One thing we do know for sure, though, it's not at the species level. Because if you can have an interspecies hybrid, well, it's within the same kind. Like lion, tiger, liger, for example. Now that blue line, that's the flood line. You can see how only one representative of every kind, on land animals anyway, made it through the flood. So think about the genetic bottleneck that was created there. How much diversity was just cut out genetically because of the flood? Who knows what sort of critters we might have had walking around if it hadn't been for the curse. So, like this diagram shows, one cat kind representative on the ark could diversify to all the cats we have today. Whether house cat, lion, cheetah. Now, let's talk about mankind for a second. Later on day 6, God made man. Let us, that's actually the first direct mention of the Trinity in the Bible, by the way. Man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over, meaning rule over, in charge over, the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. In other words, everything. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, is man a mammal? This is a little bit of a loaded question, because in one sense, yeah, we are. We have hair. Not so much fur, but it's, close in terms of its structure. We have hair. We give birth to live young. We feed our babies with milk. So, in that definition, yeah, we're a mammal. But are we a animal? No, we're not. We're of a different kind. So let's talk about types of life for a second. Now, to explain exactly what this means totally would require some deep diving into Hebrew terminology, but basically, within the biblical text, there are 3 different types of life that are mentioned. Something being living, like plants live. Something that's living and yet has a mind, or kind of the Hebrew way of putting it is like they're soulish, they kind of have a soul. Not the same way that we define a soul in English, though. More like a life force. But only humans have an eternal spirit or soul. So that's why we're not an animal. Because while we're alive and we have minds, we also have spirits that can connect to God. We're actually, spiritual beings living within physical bodies. Animals are just physical beings living in physical bodies. And plants are just alive. They don't think, they don't feel. That's why they can be eaten and it's not a problem. Another way to put it is that we're made in the image of God. Animals and plants are not. So, man is above animals. We're meant to care for the animals. In fact, if we go back a couple of slides to that, let us make man in our image, let them have dominion. Later on, you'll read when God says to Adam, have dominion over. That's actually the first direct command in the Bible. A lot of people think it's the don't eat of the tree of good and evil. Nope, that wasn't the first command. That was actually the second. The first one was actually what many creation scientists call the dominion mandate. I'll be talking a lot more about that one in, I think it's April. It's like my 8th presentation I'm doing. I'm going to be going over what does it mean to have dominion over the earth as a Christian. So, you can see that some, extant or still living and extinct species look pretty similar to each other. But others look pretty different. And reptiles, we have a whole kind of reptile that we don't have anymore. Dinosaurs. Check out this Stegosaurus. But what about this lizard? What's going on with this guy? The only thing they know is he had these plumes. They don't know if they were out on the sides or if they were a crest, but yeah. Or what about this guy with his T-Rex-like horns or his very bald but very thick head on that guy? Or what about this guy? Look at that mohawk. Or this relative of the Stegosaurus. Spiky. Or check out this guy. Or how about 8-foot-tall beavers? Or cockroaches the size of your coffee room table. Or check out these still living animals and their extinct relatives. That's actually the largest known mammal, besides the blue whale, of course. 20-foot wingspan! Wouldn't want to cross that guy. Volkswagen Beetle-sized armadillo. How'd you like to hunt that boar? Who knows what it may have been like back in those days before those animals went extinct. That sure isn't going well. Or this is a scene that possibly could have happened before the flood or maybe shortly after. Getting their little, Triceratops calf ready for the fair. This is actually a a Christian artist who's also a creationist that made these pictures, Louis Lavoie. Dinosaurs did not live separately from all the other animal kinds. They're depicted that way in art, for the most part, but we actually find other animals mixed with them in the same layers. I'll get more into that in the next presentation. Actually, the next several presentations will touch more on that. Now, very quickly, we'll cover the fall again. The fall and the flood, I'll give as a caveat, I'll be covering these in more detail within the next month's presentation, especially since we've been here for a while. So, we had the Garden of Eden. Everything was perfect. God personally formed man. This was the first time he didn't speak something into his existence. He actually formed man out of the ground. Very personal touch. He then placed Adam into the midst of the garden. But we know what happened. A certain serpent showed up on the scene, talked to Eve, made her start questioning God's word, and next thing you know, she ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then Adam, rather than doing the wise thing and going, no, wait a minute, you shouldn't have done that, he did it too, because I guess he didn't want to be left out or something. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people don't catch when they read through this part of Genesis. When God is cursing the serpent, saying that because you've done this, cursed are you more than all the livestock and more than any animal of the field. On your belly you should go and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. There's actually a prophecy put in there as well. And I will make enemies of you and the woman. And as of your offspring and her descendant, he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. This is actually the gospel, right within the first few pages of Genesis. This is called by a lot of Bible scholars the proto-gospel, where it was given in its first form, so to speak. Very ambiguous at this point. But already, shortly after Adam and Eve's original sin, God was already giving them hope that there would be restoration. So, God had to kick Adam and Eve out of the garden so that they wouldn't eat from the tree of life and live forever in their fallen state. Yeah. You think getting old is bad now? Imagine getting, old in a sense, but never being able to die. Yeah, that's actually pretty horrible. There's some science fiction stories made along those lines, and you can imagine how depressing they are. So, the flood. So, several generations after Adam and Eve, man just got more and more and more wicked. God saw that the wickedness of mankind was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts on their heart was only evil continually. So the flood was actually God's judgment on sin. It was actually his first great judgment. The second and final judgment is still coming. So, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and so among other things, God told him, you are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and of every kind of creature that moves along the ground. In other words, all the day 5 flying creatures and all the day 6 creatures. You are to take every kind of food that's to be eaten and store it away as food as for you and for them. Noah did everything as God commanded him. So, and he said every kind of creature really meant every kind of creature. From, horse kind or giraffe kind to rhino kind to ankylosaur, dinosaur kinds. Now, you may be wondering, how could Noah have fit those ginormous dinosaurs onto his ark? Or, well, what about that Volkswagen-sized armadillo? Well, one, he probably would have brought young creatures onto the ark, juveniles, because after all, they'd have a much longer life ahead of them. Secondly, the ark was not an itty-bitty little boat. It was a massive, gargantuan structure, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In feet, that's over 500 feet long, over 3 stories high. This full-size replica gives you somewhat of an example of its scale. Yeah, no, there was plenty of room for all the animals, all the food needed to feed them, and way more people than just Noah and his family. Just nobody else listened. So, the way you're typically told that the flood went was, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water slowly rose up like water in a bathtub. Well, yes, it did rain for 40 days and for 40 nights. What they don't tell you is that the whole flood itself actually lasted for over a year. Yeah, Noah was stuck on that boat for over a year. Now, let's do a little bit of earth science real quick here. So the earth is made up of multiple layers, and what we're standing on is the thin layer of crust around a mantle that's floating on. Now, there's this circulation that occurs within the Earth's crust because it's actually semi-liquid rock. So it has a convection, just like hot water in your pot also has convection. It just is much slower. Now, the Earth's crust gets shoved and pushed around because of it. So we've got these faults that are between continental plates, and depending on how they move, we'll get things like volcanoes and earthquakes. I'll go into more detail into this in my future flood geology lecture. Now, at this point, scientists are pretty certain they've tracked out where the continental plates are based on like where earthquakes happen. Now, why is our Earth all broken up like this anyway? Earthquakes and volcanoes certainly wouldn't have fit into a perfect world, right? So why do we even have this? Well, God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear, and it was so. So we're kind of going back to day 3 here. Many creation geologists believe that the original landmass before the flood was one single supercontinent. So guess what? We don't actually disagree with the evolutionary geologists that there was a supercontinent at one point in Earth's past. Our difference is how quickly we got from this guy to our present circumstances. So, Rodinia is what we call the original supercontinent. Now, this, see the number down there? That's supposedly millions of years. 70 million years. And we're going forwards in time about a million year, about 10 million years every second. Now imagine all of this happening underwater at a rate of continents moving over 5 miles an hour. That's faster than I can walk over the course of a year. This in a year. There's a reason why the Himalayas in India are still growing by a couple centimeters every year, because the energy that the subcontinent of India had when it slammed into the rest of Asia hasn't completely dissipated yet after several thousand years. That's a lot of kinetic energy. So, we went from Rodinia, Pangaea actually would have been underwater according to this model, and then today we got our modern continents. Again, I'll go into more detail into this in my more detail on this in my December flood lecture. So, we also have this detail. All the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Now, most people pay attention to the floodgates of heaven open. You know, buckets and buckets of rain, right? Well, what were all those springs of the great deep? Well, some scientists believe that was when the Earth's plates cracked open under the oceans, water hit that super hot lava, and whoo! Instantly turned into super hot jets of steam shooting thousands of feet up into the air, circumnavigating the earth, and that's where all that rain came from. Was all that water falling back down. And there were tsunamis and hurricanes the size of continents that lasted for weeks, and it wasn't just a bathtub scenario. We had volcanic activity like you wouldn't believe. It was probably something a little more like this. Catastrophe. Take all your natural disasters you can ever think of and ratchet them up to 1,000, and then have them lasting for months. When God judges, it's a big deal. So, what about all those fossils we find? Well, flood explains that pretty well too. As animals drowned in the water, they got buried by mud and sand very quickly. That mud and sand eventually seeped into their bones, turned them into rock copies. The bones themselves eventually disappeared, but the rock copies were left behind. And that's actually where we got all our fossils. Again, I'll actually go into more detail on this in November in my fossils lecture. In fact, all those layers we find in the fossils appear to more represent ecosystems that were buried, not epochs of time. And our canyons and gorges are like way too wide for our tiny little rivers that go through them. probably caused by receding floodwaters. And actually, not just by receding floodwaters, but by something called mega floods. If you want to know more about that, come in December. So, finally, when everything was over and everything dried out, Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. And every animal, every creature that was on the ark, went out by their kinds from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took some of every kind of clean animal and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. A little bit of an explanation here. God actually told Noah to bring some animals, 7 pairs of each kind, what were called the clean animals. These were the animals that were to be used as sacrifices. That way he didn't kill the only pair that survived the flood. That would have not been good. So the Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. There's some interesting discussion as to what he even meant by that. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. Doesn't mean he won't destroy, in a sense, every living thing in the future. He just won't do it the same way. He won't send another great flood. This is the verse that takes all those, oh, Noah's flood was just a local flood fairies, and kicks them right out the door. Because if that's the case, if God was never going to judge all living things as he did, then every local flood, he'd be breaking his promise. It had to be global, just for the sake of God's character. So, after Noah and his 3 sons got off the ark, well, all of us are descended in some combination from one of Noah's 3 sons. Now, most likely we actually have like multiple lineages that kind of come back together, and we're still figuring out exactly what that looks like. There's some very promising research in that regard. Now, let's talk quickly about Babel, the dispersion of languages, people groups, why we even have all these different ethnicities. Okay. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. Everybody spoke the same language. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Now, Shinar would be what we'd call Mesopotamia, or I think it's what we would call I always forget exactly where Iraq and Iran are. I think it's Iran or Persia. Anyway, and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them accordingly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, come, let's build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so we may make We may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Now, right there, they were defying one of God's commands. They were supposed to spread out and repopulate the earth, but they were like, no, we're going to all stay together and be, one group of people here. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. That whole sentence right there is a lot to unpack. Come, let's go down and confuse our language so they will not understand each other. And the text that kind of went off there says, so the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building their city. That is why it is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the languages. So, what did the Tower of Babel look like? Well, many people believe it looked like a ziggurat, because the oldest tower-like structures we find in the world are of this structure. And the closer we are to Mesopotamia, the more ziggurat-like they look. But the further away we get, the more vaguely man-made mountain shape they get, but they start looking pretty different. That's another thing. So many cultures around the world built their own version of a pyramid. Whether it was the pyramids in Mexico or the pyramids of Egypt, they found pyramid-like structures in India, on Pacific Islands. Why would all these different cultures be building the same structure anyway? So, In Genesis chapter 11, we've got our table of nations. Lots and lots and lots and lots of names you just kind of want to go right over. Well, pretty understandable if you don't know what all those names mean. But those people who have put work into figuring out those names have figured out that what we really have here is sort of about 70 family groups that existed by the time of the Tower of Babel. That when they got dispersed, there was about 70 groups of people that spread out. Fascinatingly enough, do you know approximately how many language families we've been able to condense all our languages in the world down to? Around, depending on who you ask, it's from 60 to 220 to 120. 70, I'd say, would land on about the lower end of that. But no matter how hard they've tried, evolutionary anthropologists or linguists, those who study languages, haven't been able to find the one common language. They run into this impenetrable brick wall no matter how hard they try. They can always get back to some like Proto-Indo-European, for example, family, but they can't actually get past that, what seems to be an impenetrable barrier. And it doesn't make sense, because why would language be invented 70 times over? From a secular perspective, that doesn't make any sense. But from a biblical perspective, it totally makes sense, because it was a supernatural event that caused all our different language families. Now, if we track those people, we get a general, it wasn't, of course, exactly like this, but the descendants of Japheth generally went to Europe, descendants of Ham went down into Africa, and the descendants of Shem went down into the Middle East and over into Asia, fascinatingly enough. Now, eventually, over thousands of years, groups of people got isolated enough that different characteristics genetically started expressing themselves more. So we got our Caucasian, kind of African somewhat, these different groups of traits where we were just isolated family groups that certain genetic traits got selected for and became more and more apparent. It's within recent centuries that we've started coming back together and intermingling to such an extent. But all, as Answers in Genesis likes to put it, we are all one human race. We all have the same blood, and we all came from Noah. So this here is a diagram of all the different languages, okay, and that was supposed to have been skipped. Okay, let's see. Now, you want more evidence that the Bible actually knows what it's talking about? Different cultures around the world actually have stories that sound suspiciously like Babel. For example, in Assyria, they said from Assyrian tablets that they found in Nineveh, so this was actually a good number of years, several hundred years after Babel, close to over 1,000 years. What did the Assyrians say? The building of this temple offended the gods. In a night they threw down what had been built. They scattered them abroad and made strange their speech. The progress they impeded. Or how about the Choctaw Nation from North America? The first people wondered what the sky was like, so they decided to build a tower of rocks that would touch the heavens. After the wind destroyed their first 2 attempts, the people slept next to the tower on the 3rd night. The tower was blown over again, and the rocks landed on the people. When they pushed the rocks away, they were surprised to discover that they could no longer understand each other because they no longer spoke the same language. A bit garbled, but it gets the general point across. Or how about the, forgive me if I say this wrong, Nahul. You might know them better by the English term Aztec people. Now, you can see how they have a very ziggurat-like structure here. This is fascinating. Humanity was wiped out by a flood, but one man, Quetzal, and one woman, forgive me for the pronunciation, let's see, that's like Quetzal at the end, so Xochiquetzal escaped in a boat and reached a mountain called Culahan. They had many children who were mute, until the time when a dove on top of a tree made them the gift of languages. But these differed so much that the children could not understand each other. Sounds like here that the flood account and the Babel accounts got garbled. But this is the one that will shock you. This is from a small ethnic group in China. Listen to this one, the Malo people's account. Their speaking was with all the same words and language. Then they said, "Let us build us a very big city. Let us raise unto heaven a very high tower." This was wrong, but they reached this decision. God struck at them then, changed their language and accent. Descending in wrath, he confused tones and voices. One speech to the others who hear him has no meaning. He's speaking in words, but they can't understand him. Wow. That sounds really close. There's another thing. The very ancient Chinese appear to have had a knowledge of Genesis that most ancient cultures lacked, because if we study their most ancient written language, we find some very interesting parallels. So, the top one, if you can kind of see it, is a character for so the Chinese language, as an explanation, is part pictorial, part phonetic. So what we're looking at more is the pictorial characters. A woman with 2 trees means desire, covet. A serpent with 2 trees means negative, no, not. A mouth, or eating, with a tree equals restrain or restraint. A tree in a box or enclosure, also could be a garden, means difficulty or trouble? Why would a tree in a box mean trouble? Or a hand and a lance means me, combined with a sheep means righteousness? Or how about a person combined with a sheep means beautiful? Why would a sheep person be beautiful? Now, let's take a look at a couple more. So this is the most ancient version of a Chinese character that means basically highest deity or highest god, Shangji or Ti. Now, there's a sort of abbreviated version of this character that's used that put underneath 2 trees means forbidden, to warn. Or how about the pictograph to speak, combined with dust or mud, little tick for life, and walk means to create. Speaking to dust, putting life into it so it will walk. Or how about the pictograph for boat? A vessel, the numeral 8, and a mouth, which can mean people or person. 8 mouths in a boat. Noah and his family on the ark. So this is just a handful of the incredible examples we've been able to find in the ancient Chinese own writings, that they had a very clear memory at one point of the true account within Genesis. Interestingly enough, if you paid attention to the map I showed you earlier, a lot of Shem's descendants went that way. Shem was Noah's son, that it was one of his family line that eventually, through Abraham, became the Israelites. Anyway, there's another thing that's been recollected throughout time as well. Dinosaurs. Ever heard of dragons? Well, it appears a lot of dragon legends may have been dinosaur legends. For those of you who were here last time, you got a lot more detail on this subject. But the idea is that when people were talking about They used, of course, to be more accurate, but like a game of telephone over time, as they went extinct and people stopped seeing the animals for themselves, they just kept passing along accounts until they got more garbled and warped. But look at this guy. This is an actual dinosaur they found. Does it not look very dragon-like? Or how about this dragon pendant that they found in Stone Age China? Looks more like a triceratops with his frill that just doesn't have a horn. Whoops. There we go. See? Protoceratops. Looks very alike. Or how about this petroglyph in Utah made approximately 400 years ago by Native Americans? What does it look like to you? Sure is no deer, I'll tell you that much. So, why did all that I tell you over the past